The oldest known dog burial is 14,000 years old. That predates agriculture. It predates pottery. It predates every civilization you've ever studied in school. And yet there it is. A human and a dog buried side by side, like they belong together. Because apparently they did. Think about what that means for a second. Before humans figured out how to grow food, before they built permanent shelters, before they invented any of the things we associate with civilization, they were already doing this. Already grieving animals. Already deciding that a dog deserved a grave. Already feeling something about the loss of a creature that wasn't human. Strong enough to make them stop, dig a hole in the earth, and put something they loved inside it. That is not a small thing. That is one of the most human things that has ever happened. And it happened 14,000 years ago. Here's what nobody tells you about this story, though. It isn't really a story about dogs. It's a story about us. About what we are, what we feel, what we've always felt, and why the relationship between humans and dogs is one of the strangest and most revealing chapters in the entire history of our species. Because the dog burial isn't just evidence of grief. It's evidence of something that had been building for thousands of years before that grave was ever dug. Something that started long before anyone thought to mark it with a burial. Something that changed both species permanently. And something that, if you have a dog right now, or have ever had one, you already understand on a level that doesn't need explaining. Let's start at the actual beginning. Not the burial, the relationship itself. Because wolves and humans have been in each other's orbit for a very, very long time. The domestication of dogs from wolves is one of the most studied and most debated questions in all of evolutionary biology. When did it happen? How did it happen? Why did it happen? The honest answer to all three is that we don't know exactly. And the more we study it, the more complicated and fascinating the picture becomes. What we do know is this. Dogs are the first domesticated animal. Not sheep, not cattle, not horses. Dogs. By a significant margin. The current best genetic evidence puts the domestication of dogs somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago. That's an enormous range, and the debate is ongoing. But even the conservative end of that estimate puts dog domestication firmly in the Paleolithic, the Stone Age. Tens of thousands of years before any other animal was domesticated. Humans were still hunter-gatherers, still moving, still living in small bands with no fixed address. And somehow, in the middle of all of that, they made a wolf into a dog. How that happened is where it gets genuinely strange. Because the domestication of dogs almost certainly wasn't a decision. Nobody woke up one morning 30,000 years ago and thought, I should tame a wolf. That seems like a good idea. What probably happened is considerably weirder and more accidental than that. The leading theory, supported by a growing body of evidence, is that wolves domesticated themselves. Not all wolves. Not intentionally. But some wolves, the ones with slightly less aggression, slightly more tolerance of human proximity, found that hanging around human campsites was a viable survival strategy. Humans produced waste. Waste meant food scraps. Food scraps meant calories without hunting. For a wolf willing to tolerate the smell of humans and the noise of human camps, this was an extraordinary opportunity. And so the least aggressive wolves, the ones that could get close without triggering a human fear response, did better. They ate better, they survived better, they reproduced more. And over generations, through nothing more than the ordinary mechanics of natural selection, they became something slightly different from the wolves that stayed away. Slightly smaller, slightly less aggressive, slightly more oriented toward human presence, slightly more readable in their expressions and body language, slightly more like what we would eventually call dogs. Meanwhile, on the human side, something was also happening. These proto-dogs, these semi-tame wolves hanging around the edges of camp, were useful. They were early warning systems. They could hear things humans couldn't hear in the dark. They could smell things humans couldn't smell. A camp with dogs at its edges was a camp that got earlier warning of predators, of rival groups, of anything approaching in the night. That had survival value. Real, measurable, life or death survival value. The humans who tolerated these animals at the edge of camp, who didn't drive them away, who maybe even fed them intentionally, those humans did better. Their camps were safer, their nights were less dangerous. And so both species were being shaped simultaneously, each by the presence of the other. In a slow-motion evolutionary dance that neither side was aware of, but both sides were participating in. This is called coevolution. And the human-dog relationship may be the most profound example of coevolution between two species in the history of life on Earth. But here's where it gets interesting. Because at some point, this relationship stopped being purely functional. At some point it became something else. Something harder to quantify. Something that eventually led to a grieving human, 14,000 years ago, digging a hole in the ground and placing a dog inside it with the same care they gave to their own dead. And the question is when? When did dogs stop being useful edge-of-camp alarm systems and start being something that humans loved? The honest answer is that we can't put a precise date on it, because love doesn't fossilize. But the burial record gives us clues. The famous Bonn-Oberkassel burial, discovered in Germany, dates to around 14,000 years ago, and contains the remains of an older man, a younger woman, and a dog. The dog, based on the analysis of its remains, had been seriously ill for several weeks before its death. It had a disease, likely distemper, that would have made it useless as a working animal. And yet someone had cared for it through that illness, fed it, kept it alive, and then buried it when it died. That is not the behavior of someone who sees an animal as a tool. That is the behavior of someone who loves a dog. 14,000 years ago. And the Bonn-Oberkassel burial is not unique. Dog burials have been found across every continent humans inhabited, across thousands of years of history. From ancient Israel to prehistoric North America, to Mesolithic Siberia, to Bronze Age China. Wherever humans have lived, and wherever archaeologists have dug, they keep finding buried dogs. Sometimes alone, sometimes beside humans. Sometimes with grave goods, objects placed in the burial with care, exactly as they were placed in human graves. In some ancient Native American burial sites, dogs were interred with the same ceremony as humans, positioned deliberately, accompanied by offerings. In ancient Egypt, dogs were mummified alongside their owners. In ancient China, dogs were buried beneath the foundations of homes, apparently as protective spirits. In ancient Mesopotamia, clay tablets record names given to dogs, specific individual names, not categories or descriptors, but names, which means those dogs were understood as individuals with identities. The same way you understand your dog. The same way you've always understood yours. Now here's something that cuts even deeper. The dog's ability to read human emotion is not coincidental. It's not a side effect of domestication. It is one of the most extraordinary adaptations in the animal kingdom. And it points to just how deeply the two species have shaped each other. Dogs can follow a human pointing gesture. Chimpanzees, our closest genetic relatives, largely cannot. Dogs can read human facial expressions with a sophistication that no other animal approaches. They have developed a muscle above their eyes, the levator anguli oculi medialis, that wolves do not have. That evolved specifically to make eye contact with humans more expressive, more communicative, more emotionally legible. Dogs literally evolved a facial muscle for the sole purpose of communicating with us more effectively. They didn't choose to. Natural selection built it into them, because the dogs that could connect with humans more effectively did better. But the result is an animal that looks at you with an expressiveness that feels almost human. That tracks your emotional state. That responds to your grief, your joy, your fear. That chooses to be near you, not because you have food, but because you are you. And that is not a small thing. That is the product of tens of thousands of years of two species becoming, in some deep and unrepeatable way, part of each other. Which brings us to the question that the burial evidence really raises. Not why did ancient humans bury their dogs? We can see why. They grieved them. The question is, why did they grieve them? What was it about this particular animal that inspired a response in humans that they reserved for their own dead? No other domesticated animal gets this. Cattle were domesticated. Sheep were domesticated. Pigs were domesticated. Horses were domesticated. All of them useful. All of them important to human survival. None of them consistently buried with the care and intention given to dogs. What made dogs different? The answer, almost certainly, is the relationship itself. Dogs didn't just live near humans. They lived with humans. They slept beside humans. They hunted with humans. They played with humans. They watched human faces for information. They mourned human absences. They greeted human returns. They were, in the most literal sense, members of the group. And in a species that understood itself in terms of the group, that was the deepest possible category of belonging. Here's where it lands on you, because it always does. The reason you feel what you feel about your dog, the particular quality of that relationship, the way it's different from your relationship with any other animal. The grief that comes when you lose one. A grief that can feel disproportionate to people who haven't experienced it. That doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from 15,000 years of two species building something together. Something that started with a wolf at the edge of a fire and became one of the most enduring relationships in the history of life on this planet. The grief you feel for a dog is ancient. It is legitimate. And the fact that humans 14,000 years ago felt it too, felt it enough to dig a grave and place their companion inside with care, tells you something that no amount of evolutionary biology quite captures on its own. They knew, they always knew, that some bonds don't need to be explained. They just need to be honored. And so they dug a hole in the earth, and they put their dog inside, and they said goodbye the only way any of us ever really can. With presence, with care, with their hands in the dirt. Some things are exactly as old as they feel.